Well, Dr. Lopkin, we're once again back at it. It's Friday, another very eventful week as we're doing Carnivore Bites. Host Jeff Sherman along with Dr. Eric Lopkin. And Dr. Lopkin, obviously the big event as we look at today, the 18th of May, is the school shooting in Texas, isn't it?
It really is. This is just absolutely horrific. And I mean, it's different from most of the school shootings, though. This guy went in armed with a shotgun, but they later, and they're still finding actually, homemade pipe bombs and pressure cooker bombs placed around the school.
Jesus. Yes, that is something. Obviously he's mentally ill, but any ties, any terrorist organizations or anything like that?
They haven't.
Too early to tell.
Yeah, they haven't said that there's any ties to terrorists. He was a student at the school.
Okay, then he's just a nut.
Yes.
It seems to be that, I don't know, 30 years ago, I remember going postal. If you were crazy, you'd go out in a blaze of glory by shooting up a post office or maybe even restaurants. I think there's a couple of examples of that. McDonald's for one, I forgot the other, in the 80s. Seems to me, and I think it's becoming more pervasive, if you're a nut, you go out, your calling card is a school shooting, correct?
It does seem to be that way now. I mean, it could be partially because schools are generally, gun-free zones, so you're not going to come up with any opposition. It could also be the fact that high school as a whole is generally, considered so traumatic that could be a trigger.
That could be as well, yes, because the last couple did go to the school, and there's a lot of emotion. It's funny because I had a teacher years ago when I was in high school, and he said to a friend of mine, "This is not the happiest time of your life." I mean, he was a great guy. He was just basically saying, and it's true, it seems all easy, but there's a lot of stressors going on in high school.
Right.
So many decisions, so many rejections, so many things that really weigh on people. So it is an emotionally laden time of life.
And all of the shooters that we've seen recently have all been ostracized. They've been loners. So these aren't people that have, a social network that they can connect to and get support from.
Yeah, and also I think another problem, speaking of support, I think people, no matter what the age is, are becoming emotionally more insulated and isolated, a la social media, video games. So let's say 30 years ago, kids would have a problem. Let's say a high school kid might have a problem. I think people were more connected. I think that's true regardless of the age. But obviously we're talking about a school shooting. So I think if you got emotional problems, I think sending a text just isn't going to cut it.
No, it certainly isn't. And I think it was probably easier to spot back then. Because if everybody was much more communal, you got together for games and to play and whatever. And if somebody stayed away from that, if somebody was a loner, it was easy to spot. Now everybody's on their phone all the time. If somebody's just doing that, you can't tell if they're being a loner or they're just like everybody else and focused on the phone. Good
point. Yes. And that's just kind of one more component of what I was saying in terms of social media being more isolated. I agree with that 100%. Now, obviously, in this supercharged political environment, there's going to be repercussions as well. How do you think this plays out?
I don't honestly think anything politically is going to come from this. There was more of a case to make a political play after past shootings, and they weren't able to get any gun control or anything passed. This, again, because it's so unique, where it's not an assault weapon, it's a simple shotgun, it's homemade weapons, I don't think anything political is going to come from it.
Good point, although our own senators, Blumenthal and Murphy, are sure will use this opportunity, especially Murphy, one way or another, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they never met a camera they didn't like.
Exactly, which is totally amazing. And speaking of Mr. Blumenthal, this week we moved the embassy on Monday, the Israeli embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And, looking at the political landscape, and this is very interesting to me, that constituency bases in the Democratic Party, two strong constituencies used to be African American and Jews, correct?
Correct.
What does it mean? Does it have any implications, repercussions in terms of, I think in the African American community, the Democratic, stranglehold on them is becoming weaker, but that's for another discussion. Let's look at their Jewish constituency. There is not one Jewish not even Jewish, not one congressperson or senator from the Democratic Party that was at the unveiling of the new embassy in Jerusalem. Do you think that has any repercussions at all, potentially?
I don't know. I mean, people are so tied up in these identities. I don't know if that's enough to shake them loose. I do know that Orthodox Jews, who are generally very pro-Israel, they already tend to vote Republican.
Yes, but I'm talking about the more the more stereotypical liberal Jew from New York, from Connecticut, what have you, LA. When you look at the Democratic Party, it's become, a far left party, and that's certainly another discussion. But in terms of, they used to be big supporters of Israel. Over the last 20 years, they're not really. Look at Obama. Look at Keith Ellison. These people are not. They're not in the corner of Israel or a lot of Jewish issues. So I wonder how it's going to play out. They've
abandoned Israel completely.
Yes. So why is there such a lag between what's actually going on in the Democratic Party and why haven't more Jews, liberal Jews, vacated it? Because you look at Trump, he's one of the more maybe, and in fact there was an article, the most pro-Israeli president maybe in history. Yet Jews seem to still cling on to traditional liberal democratic ideology. Do you think it's going to change, Lopkin?
I don't know that it is. I think there's so much nonsense out there that nobody really pays attention anymore to what's really happening.
I think that's a good point, but you need to vote for your own self-interest, and it doesn't seem to me that Stormy Daniels should trump, no pun intended, a party's position on Israel, which should be important to almost every Jew. Don't get the disconnect there.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. You should always vote for your own self-interest. But both parties throw out so much bull, I don't think most people realize where their self-interest lies.
I would agree with that. I think that's a good thought and a good final thought as we conclude this carnivore bite. Any final thoughts, Dr. Lopkin?
Well, certainly, our hearts go out to all of the people in Santa Fe, Texas, and God willing, no one else will be hurt.
I agree with that 100%. Until next week, arrivederci.
You've been listening to Carnivore Radio's podcast. You can catch us here every week. Carnivore Radio is part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can listen to the podcast at blogtalkradio.com/Xvadio. If you want to be part of the conversation, you can listen to us live every Friday at 4 o'clock on WESU 88.1 Middletown, Connecticut. You can also catch us online at WESUFM.org. We look forward to hearing from you and see you next week.